vampires to plat 1. It actually exists. It is actually to be possible. I don't give about anything because you know what? I don't care. It took me a jillion years, but I took my meme deck to plat 1 and it was the whole way through. And everyone kept saying, Mango, stop tilting, it's just a game. And to that I say, you're so correct. Why was I getting so tilted? It's just a game. Here's the deck. It's a vampire deck, aka only 13 vampire cards. So 13 is not a whole lot considering you need to have vampire names in your hand to be able to trigger their effects. But you know what? We make it work. And so we got platform with this deck list. And so it is a vampire deck, but it's using the Zombie World package to become more of like a combo variant of the Zombie World package versus like pure Zombie World, which could have some combo potential, but is usually more so played as like a control deck. So that's kind of the advantage of teching in the vampire cards in this kind of deck, is to be able to have the access to the swarm potential that vampires can provide if you have like the right hands. It allows you to also extend with Uni-Zombie so that you have more ways to go into Uni-Zombie, Mill, Necroworld, Banshee, and then special summon one of your small vampires onto the field, so then you could go into something like a Happy Fibrax, so you can special summon from the deck Glow Bloom, which is then going to allow you to link it away so that you go into the Doom King Balderrock after chaining the Necroworld Banshee, so you could place the Zombie World from your deck onto the field. That's a quick effect. That's the basic combo line that I just described, and that's kind of like the gist of why the vampire engine ends up being like a nice addition. Truth be told, this is just more so a preview of the strength of vampires to come. That being said, it is a competent deck that has very strong plays but very clear choke points, and that's kind of why climb to plat 1 was such a difficulty for me. So, but let's break down the cards and kind of like go through more in depth as to what is the thing. So Vampire Familiar, the whole idea of it is that's your searcher. When you special summon it in any way, you could search for a vampire monster. What you search kind of depends on your hand, and that's the interesting about this deck, is it's kind of not a linear deck, even though it seems like on the surface. Usually you want to search either a Grace to discard, a Retainer to discard, or if your hand is absolutely bonkers, Shadow Vampire to be able to normal summon that turn. So that's one. So you have a few ways of getting Vampire Familiar onto the field. The one being normal summoning it and then linking it away so that you could then use its effect in the graveyard to discard a vampire card from the hand, or face the field, so you can special summon it and do the searchy. The two small vampires that we play, Familiar, Retainer, have that same special summon condition. Retainer's difference being that it searches Spell Trap, which is also vital. But basically, like, the whole idea of this is that if you have vampire names, you could extend with Familiar, and sometimes that helps you kind of bait out Ash Blossoms. If you're able to use your Familiar effect or Retainer effect first, that could kind of like help you hold the Uni-Zombie first if need be, so that if your opponent has that Ash that they're holding, you could try to bait them out into negating your Familiar search. Or if your Retainer search, then you go ahead, normal summon Uni-Zombie, and you continue your plays. So what you search for Familiar really does depend on the game state, and I'll show off some clips. Retainer is really useful both in completing your best combos as well as searching an Omni Negate for vampires. Since the deck, even without the vampire package, was already playing a vampire name in the extra deck, Vampire Sucker, that you were often summoning, the Domination just being searched lets you very consistently be able to like have it live because of just your regular zombie combos. So just being able to have an Omni Negate on top of your regular plays is already gives the deck more power. It helps you do things like set up a Balderrock in the grave to summon into the standby phase while having a Domination to negate a called by the grave that the opponent might try to use to banish your Balderrock from coming back. So we talked about like the standard combo. Uni-Zombie, usually you want to mill Banshee, and then you want to have a way of getting another monster on the field, so you could go into Happy Fibrax using the two. And how do you get another monster on the field? Well, since the deck is pretty normal reliant, the way I've kind of built the deck is to try to like fine-tune the amount of special summons we could get, or at least extenders that we could get, so that we don't just stop a Uni-Zombie, mill Banshee, and then just have no plays other than hoping that it's Tri-Brigade losing to Zombie World. We play cards like Vampire Desire, which is cracked, but also sometimes not. You target a monster on your field, and then you can send one vampire card from your deck to the graveyard, so you could change the level of that monster on your field to that vampire monster's level. So you could use that Desire onto Uni-Zombie first, before your opponent even like does anything, so that you could go ahead and feel out for any ashes. They sometimes ash that, sometimes they won't. If they don't, then whatever, YOLO. But if they do, then we have other plays to make plays, but usually use this to go ahead and send Familiar or Retainer if you have a vampire name in hand to be able to special summon them, and then you go pop off into Happy Fibrax from there. If you don't have vampire names in the hand, but you do have Uni-Zombie into Happy Fibrax combo in another way, what you could mill here is Vampire Grace. And Grace is actually an insane card in this deck because it has so much synergy with Balderrock. What Grace does is its first effect doesn't matter right now because we don't have enough vampire support from the new set releases in the TCG OCG to make the most out of it in a non-risky way. But what its second effect does is basically when you summon a level 5 or higher zombie monster by by a zombie monster's card effect, you can special summon it by paying 2,000 life points, which is an insane cost because you're already paying 1 billion life points. By the way, vampires suck your life points, if you didn't know. But that helps you get more bodies on the field, and also helps you like have a way of triggering Baller Drox effect, which sometimes gets really becomes really clutch, and also helps you get another vampire name on the field to have domination live. So sometimes that's just like a good target to have in the graveyard. So that's one. We also play Foolish Burial just as another way to get a Necro World Banshee in the graveyard, so that then we could focus on using Unizombie to send like a Glow Bloom or something to the graveyard, so we can then special summon the Baller Drox, or we could just send a vampire name to the graveyard if we feel like we could full combo from there on. We play Reasoning because it is a card that is random as fuck, but also is another way of special summoning monsters. This is obscene the amount of times people declare the right number, even though we have so many different levels in this deck. But we've also summoned the mirror from this, and nobody ever declares 11. A lot of times people do end up declaring number 10 because they think of the weird Eldritch deck that was playing Reasoning, so they just think they're playing against Eldritch. Or sometimes they'll declare 4, and then you'll mill Solitaire, and you'll be really angry at yourself. But sometimes they'll declare 3, and you'll mill Solitaire, and you'll be thanking the lords you play Solitaire, which, by the way, Solitaire is another copy of Unizombie. So like the best cards to send to the graveyard are, if they call the right number, would be the Familiar, would be the Retainer, or the Banshee, which is nice when they call level 4, and having that extra level 4 so that you're not just losing your Solitaire is really nice as an option. But everything else sent to the graveyard, if they call level 6, Grace in the graveyard is nice as well, and Baller Drox in the graveyard could be nice as well, but not getting that summon is going to hinder your plays, and that's kind of what that does, is even if like those cards could be good in the graveyard, they're not extending your board, which is the main thing you want Reasoning for. Since we're not playing cards like Mitsuki, Kazuki, you might be asking why we're not playing cards like Kazuki or Mitsuki. It's because those could potentially be extra bricks if we're not already popping off. They help you extend, but we're playing the vampire cards to replace that kind of level of extension, and the deck is already so normal summon reliant. If you're not able to mill it, Mizuki and get other cards in the graveyard with Foolish Burial or discard it off of Unizombie, then it's just kind of stuck in your hand as an awkward normal summon. Now, if you're glorious enough to have like your full Beatrice combo, which you play in the extra deck, what that kind of looks like is a lot of cards, but the minimum amount of cards needed for Beatrice combo in most situations is Familiar, Retainer, and Domain, and what that ends up being is probably also requiring a Unizombie, but not always. Basically, you need to have a way of setting up having a normal summon, so that you can normal summon Shadow Vampire while having a monster to be able to tribute over it, while having a Grace in the graveyard. What that does is allow you to normal summon Shadow Vampire, special summon the Scarlet Scourge from the deck, which allows you to then special summon Grace from the graveyard, which is 2 level 6s, allowing you to go into Beatrice, and that lets you set up your craziest Zombie World combos, because you could just mill on your turn, Necro World Banshee, and then you could just hold Beatrice effect until like your opponent's main phase, and not worry about Harpy's Feather Duster, not have to worry about Lightning Storm, and you just wait for your opponent to start committing, and then you detach your Grace with the Beatrice, so that you could then mill from the deck the Glow Bloom, so that you could then go ahead and special summon the Baller Drox from the deck, which is going to allow you to then special summon the Grace from the graveyard, because you use Glow Bloom's effect to special summon the Baller Drox, which is going to allow you to then start banishing one of their monsters on the field, and then you still have a Baller Drox negate as well. So it ends up being like one of your best setups. We also play 1 for 1. That's kind of why I cut down Vampire Familiar to 3, even though it seems really nice to have more copies of it just to be able to discard. It just really felt like we needed to make more room for both extenders, as well as being able to make room for text that we needed. So at the end of the day, I just figured that 1 for 1 ended up being my 3rd copy of Familiar anyway, while also giving me another way of going into Glow Bloom as well, in case I needed a tuner to be able to go into a Hauki 5-box play, or just straight up just summon Baller Drox because I already have Zombie World on the field. So there's that. Domain is a card that you will sometimes also search with Retainer. You pay 500 life points to get you an additional normal summon of a vampire monster. That's kind of how you end up pulling off the whole combo with Shadow Vampire into Scourge, into Graces. Let's say you start off with Unizombie, right? And then you go ahead and send a Retainer from your deck to the graveyard, which will then allow you to like discard, let's say, a Familiar in your hand to special summon the Retainer, which will allow you to search the Vampire's domain. Then you could pay 500 life points and then get into the show normal summon of a vampire monster, and then you go ahead and use that Familiar to send that domain to the graveyard. Even though it's sent to the graveyard, you still get that additional normal summon, which is going to allow you to special summon the Familiar, searching the Shadow Vampire. Now at this point, you still have to kind of worry about getting the Grace to the graveyard, so that's where it gets a little more particular. That's where if you also had a Foolish Burial in hand, you could mill it, or if you had a Desire, you could mill it, or if you had it in hand, use Unizombie's second effect to mill it as well, or you could have just discarded it off of a familiar and left a domain on the field. So it's definitely a particular setup, but there are a few combinations of hands and that allow you to go into it depending on the situation, and that's when you go and use your additional normal summon to go into Shadow Vampire. And a neat thing about Shadow Vampire setup is that also allows you to go into turn 1 Savage Dragon, because if you go Halki Fibrax, since you end up swarming the board so much, ending it off with Unizombie, Shadow Vampire, Grace, Scarlet Scourge, as well as Retainer. Usually you link away the familiar into Link Karibo to get yourself a Link monster for the Savage Dragon, and then you tribute over that Link Karibo for the Shadow Vampire. But that leaves you with so many monsters. So you end up using the Grace and the Scourge for the Beatrice. You end up using the Unizombie and the Retainer for the Halki Fibrax to summon another Unizombie from the deck, which then you use alongside the Shadow Vampire to summon a Savage Dragon, which allows you to go ahead and have a negate using the Link Karibo as your equip token. You can use Halki Fibrax's effect before you actually use Beatrice's effect, because remember, Balloon Burst restricts you to only summoning zombie monsters for the rest of the turn. So you use Halki Fibrax's effect, so you can summon Formula Synchron, which allows you to then go and after you use Beatrice's effect to get your Doom King on the board and your Grace on the board, allows you to go ahead and use the Formula Synchron to Synchro Summon. You could even use it alongside the Doom King Baller Drock so that you can trigger Baller Drock's effect, since Formula Synchron's effect is counts as a zombie, activating its effect under Zombie World. Most importantly, you could then go ahead and Synchro Summon into Sun Saga to pop 1. And if you've already used your 1 Savage Dragon negate, you could use Formula Synchron along with that Savage Dragon to go Sun Saga, pop 2, which is actually kind of insane. It never comes up because this game is too hard, but it's insane that it could. So there's that. And basically, if this video is outdated in like a week because they released the Baron de Fleur, well, you're not playing this. You're playing Baron de Fleur. Take this shit out. And also, that'll show just how much better this deck will be if we were able to get to Plat 1 with Sun Saga instead of Baron de Fleur. I think I went through the main cards. I mean, Zombie World, the whole reason for it is being relevant is the fact that it's a field spell that lets you constantly summon Baller Drock onto the field every standby phase. And then Baller Drock, whenever a zombie monster activates its effect, can negate it, or you could banish 1 card in either player's field or graveyard. You could use both effects in the same turn, but you can't use them in the same chain. So you just have to be smart about how you're reacting to your opponent based on what they're doing. The good thing is, like, you could use this in response to your own zombie effects. And again, the synergy with Zombie World being that everything becomes a zombie in the field and in the graveyard. So you can respond to your opponents negating their effects. You can respond to your own non-zombies that are now zombies, like your Formula Synchron, to just banish whatever as spot removal. And then you can go ahead, synchro it off away, or link it off away with that IP Masquerade to combo the Vampire Grace and Baller Drock to go into an Appaloosa on your opponent's turn. Then on your next turn, you can summon back Baller Drock, which will then summon back the Vampire Grace. So it just ends up flooding your field a lot more than the regular Zombie World build typically would, unless you draw like crazy engine pieces that allows you to get the same level of plays that you otherwise wouldn't. So it's really helpful. It helps you get quick OTKs that you otherwise wouldn't be able to, as long as your setup isn't interrupted. That being said, the setup is relatively fragile because we do typically die to Ash Blossom on Unizombie, depending on the hand. If you have like 1-for-1, if you have cards like Vampire Desire, or if you even have like the right card to discard in the hand, for example, Necroworld Banshee, then you could still continue to play the game, but a lot of times Ash ends up being really hurtful. So we play Called by the Grave, of course, because that's a good card. If you can't afford Max C or your hand traps, another good card to play is honestly Pot of Prosperity. I was trying it at 2, and it was like a really nice addition because it lets you dig through your deck to be able to like get cards that you really need, such as combo pieces to, let's say, get your Unizombie, or being able to get like a combo piece for your Vampire Engine, like a Desire or something for your discard. It's really helpful, and it also lets you bait out the delay to see if there's an Ash Blossom in hand, so that you could then consider the order and how you're going to play the game to try to bait them out before doing your design plays. It also helps you go and dig for a Call by the Grave if you already have combo, so you could then be like, hey, I know you're going to Ash me or Maxi me, so please don't do that. I'm usually comfortable banishing 6 from the extra deck anyway, since we get to choose. As usually when I was playing Pot of Prosperity, I was banishing Riser Dragon, because usually you know by looking at your opening hand if you're going to need to summon it. Same with Chaos Ruler, or whatever its space was, Nightmare Phoenix, IP Appaloosa, and whatever else. Maybe Beatrice if I didn't feel confident I was going to end up summoning it. I only played 2 Nibiru just because I really struggled to cut out another core piece and another like extender from the deck, just because when we don't pop off going first, it's a struggle. Like you really need to get your combo going turn 1, so we want to maximize the amount of ways we could do that. So that's why I wanted to play cards like 3 Reasoning, 1-for-1, Foolish Burial, Desire, and I think honestly the way we lose so hard to Ash Blossom, adding in 3 cross-out designators over the Maxi might be relevant, though Maxi is kind of necessary going second. Helpful to be able to draw into your Nibiru's as well. And honestly, if you're going second, you really want to see those Nibiru's. Like, going second against like a deck that could actually play the game and go crazy going first, you probably want to have your Nibiru in hand, which means you probably want to have your Maxi to draw into the Nibiru in hand, or at least scare them from giving you too many draws to get to that point. Ash Blossom is a good card to help you also scare your opponent going second. And also, it's just like really nice to stop all the Maxis that keep cucking you. And also, sometimes you use Ash Blossom being a tuner on the field to go into Halki Fibrax plays. It's insane how many times I need to do that to extend in ways that I otherwise wouldn't be able to. Especially if you already have a Zombie World access somehow, but you don't have a Uni-Zombie. If you have like Ash Blossom and you special summon like a Familiar or a Retainer, go into Halki Fibrax, summoning the Globe Bloom, Halki Fibrax, summoning the Globe Bloom, and then you link it away. There's your full combo anyway. So that's funny. Again, Cross-Out Disseminator probably would help you lose to Ash Blossom a lot less. So that's something to consider. What to take out, it's hard to say. You could also take out a Reasoning as well. I want to say take out the Maxis, but Maxis are such really like important for you to be able to draw into like any text like Nibiru as well if you're going second and if you're relying on something like that. And Reasoning is kind of an unreliable card in theory as well, so you don't want to use it. Yu-Gi-Oh is playing only one Necroworld Banshee and only one Zombie World, so I can make room for more text and more extenders, but you really have to play more copies just because, first of all, Reasoning more often than you expect will end up filling your one copy of Zombie World, so much so that we were playing Barricade Blocker just to attempt to add it back, and that never happened. But also just because like your opponents will often Lightning Storm it, they'll often Harpy's Feather Duster it because they will always have their one of, and then you just are like, okay, well there's my whole strategy, GG bye. So you really need to have the follow up. In pure Zombie Worlds, we typically play 2 Doom King just because if it gets banished, we end up losing the game, and playing 2 Glow Bloom to make it easier to access it. We don't have that luxury here just because we really need to make room for all the other pieces, but I would say that beyond like the occasional Call by the Grave, you really aren't as concerned about it as you are concerned about protecting your Zombie World and keeping it live with Banshees as well. Also, the fact that you could Surge Domination helps you like really be able to protect from things like Called by the Grave if you're trying to like create some of your biggest boards. Domination is really nice. So having a searchable Omni Negate really adds a lot of power to the deck. And if you don't have your Beatrice setup, your 3 to 4 card combo to make Beatrice, then you could just say, okay, well I'm just going to use Retainer to search my 1 Domination instead, and that's perfectly fine. Because a lot of times that could still help you go combo off with Uni-Zombie to end on a board of Zombie World, Vampire Sucker, Halki Fibrax, and special summoning Doom King Baller Jock on the opponent's turn, having a Domination set, and being able to go into Sun Saga next turn. And in the future, Baron is the Fleur. Trust, Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon. The way you summon it is the same way you could summon Borreload Savage Dragon, which is the typical way you're going to summon your level 8s is that Shadow Vampire into Uni-Zombie combo I talked about, which is only when you're insanely popping off turn 1. But the more typical way is if you have something like a Vampire Grace or a Scarlet Scourge on your field, and then you go Hulk into summoning Formless Synchron, level 2, level 6, that equals level 8. We do have an alternative way of going to level 8s, however, and that is Shooting Riser Dragon. Shooting Riser Dragon is just really there as kind of like a desperate attempt to have follow-up in case we're interrupted and we need just some way to play the game. Let's say if like we couldn't get Necroworld Banshee in the graveyard at turn 1 and we're still able to go into Hulk combo, but we're unable to go and like actually set up Zombie World, and then we'll go into Halki Fibrax on the opponent's turn, go into Shooting Riser Dragon. What that does is on Synchro Summon, which Hulk's effect does count as a Synchro Summon, we can mill a monster from our deck, and we reduce Shooting Riser Dragon's level by the monster set. The only stipulation being that we can't activate the effect of any card with the same name as the monster sent to the graveyard. So we could use this to send Necroworld Banshee to the graveyard, but we won't be able to use Banshee that same turn, otherwise that would be straight broken. So usually you just use this as a way of hoping that you survive whatever your opponent is doing turn 2, and then hoping that you have plays turn 3. But on top of that, you could also summon Shooting Riser Dragon, a level 7, and let's say if you ended on a board of like Retainer instead, that you summon to search Domination, and you ended on Retainer with Domination and Halki Fibrax. You use up the Domination to interrupt your opponent, then you go into Halki Fibrax, using effect to summon the Shooting Riser Dragon. That's going to allow you to go ahead and mill a Familiar, which sets up your follow-up, while changing the Shooting Riser Dragon to level 6. Level 6 plus level 2 equals level 8. That's another way of going into level 8 Synchro. So that can get you into your Borreload Savage Dragon, or that can get you into into your Chaos Ruler Magical Dragon. I don't think this is necessary at all. I used it once to mill a Necromold Banshee and a Glow Bloom of the 5, and then added a follow-up Dark Monster to the hand as well under the opponent's turn when they interrupted my turn 1 Zombie World setup. It was like a 0% chance of happening, so don't rely on it, but it's hilarious that it could happen. So that's something to consider, but I don't think if you're strapped on like URCP, like you could replace this with so many other things. I rarely ever summon this. It's kind of win more if you are summoning it, or it's kind of like I'm probably gonna die, so let me just do this instead. You can also play Sheridan. Sheridan seems like a no-brainer to play in this deck. I know, like I said, like Chaos Ruler was a flex pod. A lot of the cards here, if you don't necessarily have to be played. But I feel like Sheridan doesn't do enough a lot of time to be worthwhile. Like if I'm ever going level 6 on level 6, I want to go Beatrice. The only time Sheridan would really be amazing is whenever you summon Scourge from the deck using Glow Bloom's effect while you already have Grace in the graveyard. So you could summon Scourge into Grace, which does lock you into zombies only. So you'd only be able to summon like a zombie Link, like your Savior or your Sucker, or you'd be able to summon your Sheridan, and it comes up once in every very, very many duels, but I don't think it's worth enough to play, but I think you could definitely play it over the Chaos Ruler. So that's kind of like the fun part of the sync component. How into like Synchro lets you kind of like manipulate so many different types of Synchro summons, and shooting Riser Dragon helps you do that as well. So let's say if you have Shadow Vampire on the field, as well as Hacky Firebrax, you weren't able to Synchro it off on your turn. Well, you can't use Formula Synchron now because you're going to play a level 7 Synchro. So you're going to go ahead and use Shooting Riser Dragon to end up milling that Necromold Banshee, which will set you up for next turn, while also giving you a level 3 Shooting Riser Dragon plus level 5. That's level 8. GG easy. You have a negate. Look at you playing the game, or stopping them from doing so at least. So I would say definitely for this build, I would say Borolo Savage Dragon's Core. I think Shooting Riser Dragon's Core just for the options it enables in like weird game states, and Formula Synchronous Core alongside Hacky Firebrax, Link Karibo, and Beatrice Lady of the Eternal. You don't summon Beatrice often, but when you do, you are so impressed that this deck could actually be good. You don't need to play Sun Saga. It's nice that you have the option of an extra interruption once you're spent from all of your negates, all of your banishes, to know that you still have one more play after that to disrupt your opponent just in case is nice, and it can come up. But for now, like if you're strapped on it, it rarely comes up, so you don't need to play this. Nightmare Phoenix, I played because I can. Vampire Sucker is core. I played it 1, but you could probably replace things like Chaos Ruler, the Chaotic Magical Dragon, for a second copy of this. Essentially, what it does is you can special summon a monster from your opponent's graveyard and special summon it as a zombie monster. And then when a zombie monster is special summoned from either player's graveyard, you get to draw a card. So there's a synergy there. But also, since you're special summoning your vampire cards from the graveyard, often whether it's Retainer or Familiar off of their own effects or Grace off of its own effects, you're getting a lot of card advantage once you're set up, which helps you really play the game. It also has a really freaking dank effect that nobody ever remembers, myself included, which says that you could tribute your opponent's zombie monsters to tribute summon one of your own monsters. So if you have Zombie World on the field and your opponent has some crazy ass boss monster, you could be like, whoop, yoink, normal summon scored using their monster, and now you're popping off using their monsters. That's cracked. It doesn't come up often, but it could, so remember that. Also, one big thing, Vampire Sucker, especially if you're just like put into the maxi challenge and you're just forced to like combo off and give your opponent like 7,000 draws, you have like your best combo. You could summon like a negate, you could search an Omni negate, and you could set a Beatrice into Zombie World next turn. You're feeling good, but the problem is your opponent now has 15 cards in hand. What do? Well, you also make sure you end on Sucker, so you can special summon that Maxi or that Ash Blossom onto their side of the field to get yourself an underdraw. That will give them an underdraw with Maxi as well. Even though you're summoning to their side of the field, you're still the one special summoning. But that will also allow you to have a monster on their side of the field, which turns off the Lightning Storm that they likely drew into by this point. And there's so many Lightning Storms that I've read to. This is dank as hell. You'll still have to use your Domination onto the Feather Duster and Raigeki that I'll ultimately have because one of statistics are wild. But at least like Lightning Storm is something you'll have. You'll be less pressure to use your negates on, and then you can start focusing on like actually playing through their 70 million cards that they have the ability to play with. So there's also that. We play Avenged Savior. It's a backup option really. So what it does in the context of this deck, the only thing it really does for us is when it attacks into a monster or when it battles a monster, you could send one zombie monster from your deck to the graveyard, and that monster loses attack equal to the level of the said monsters to the graveyard times 200 until the end of its turn. So what this does is, let's say if you are going second, and you weren't quite able to set up a Necroworld Banshee in the graveyard because of Ash, but you were able to go into Link Summon. You use Unizombie and another zombie monster so you can make a Vengeance Savior, attack it to your opponent's monster, and then you go ahead and you mill that Necroworld Banshee, and now that part of the combo is live. Or let's say if you're just in an awkward situation, you were able to get Banshee into the graveyard in some way, like Foolish Burial, but you don't have Unizombie, you can't go Hulk into Glow Bloom. So you get Vengeance Savior, and then you go ahead attack, you mill Glow Bloom, and now you have a Baldur Rock on the field as well, which is really nice. IP Masquerena, we played because while this deck doesn't always get to spit out 9 monsters in a board, it sometimes can, and when you can, it's hilarious that you could just like IP Masquerena into Appaloosa while still having Baller Rock and like a Domination live off of that as well, and then still leaving yourself a Hauki Fibrax into Formula Synchron to be able to then go into whatever other play that you want to go into. We play Nightmare Unicorn because we can very feasibly go into Nightmare Unicorn into Access Code Talker OTKs just because of the amount of swarming that this deck does. The deck does a really good job at closing out the game once it's like outgrinded the opponent. And Appaloosa, we play it just because we can. So I'd say like of the extra deck, the essentials I would say are the Tuner Synchros that are SRs, Savage Dragon for sure, Beatrice, Link Karibo, Hauki Fibrax, Sucker, at least one. Savior, even though it sucks to spend a UR on it, it is really nice to have. It comes up like 5% of the time, but that 5% of the time it comes up, you're like so happy it's there. Nightmare Unicorn for Access Code Talker OTKs, and then Access Code Talker because it really gives you OTK potential. There's so many plays where you could end on, let's say you're going second, you do your Hauki Fibrax into Glow Bloom, and you have, let's say, another vampire monster on the field. You go Hauki Fibrax into your vampire monster to summon Unicorn, using the Glow Bloom to summon Access Code Talker. That lets you then use Bloom's effect as long as you can set up Zombie World on the field with Banshee, allowing you to set up Baller Rock onto the field. That ends up being over 8k damage with just those 2 monsters alone. 53 plus 28, quick maths. Appaloosa isn't really necessary for this deck if you can't afford it, but you should probably get Appaloosa at some point in time. Like, let's be real. In terms of main deck, you probably want to find a way to fit in Crossout Designator, honestly. The amount of times Ash ends up being a problem, or even Maxi is just too damn high. You could probably take out like the Nibiru's as well as Reasing and just be like, I am just going first and I'm winning forever, and Ash will be enough to save me forever. And then basically essentially play 5 copies of Hate for Ash Blossom and other types of hand traps. And that's pretty much it. Yeah. You play this deck? I don't know, watch my previous Zombie World Peer profile and see which one you like better. But this one's fun. I like it a lot. But you also feel more secure with this build when you have set up with Domination and earlier Savage Dragon. Like, this deck has some of the highest highs that Zombie World could achieve, but also some of the lowest lows. Once you get Vampire Ghost, you could focus more on, like, Ghost to be your Beatrice setup, because Ghost ends up being an automatic setup to Beatrice as long as you have any other Vampire card in hand. It's pretty cracked. But we'll talk about that in, like, a year when I do this deck profile revisited when they finally release this for whatever reason. I think that's pretty much it. What else am I supposed to say? Oh, I don't know. Something. Comment, subscribe, and like, and write me a message on LinkedIn to tell me how fancy this deck list is.